Right, ladies and gentlemen, sorry once again for the technical issues that we have experienced. Nevertheless, my presentation will be devoted to the gut microflora and means to regulate it. My company is based in St. Pete, and we've been operating in the market for over 2 decades, and we've been studying the microflora, gut microflora of poultry, uh, cattle, and so on and so forth. And we use the cutting edge molecular diagnosis techniques. This is our CEO, who is the winner of the national prize in microbiology. Based on the scientific data, we produce various sorbents and feed additives, probiotics, preservatives, and so on and so forth. Uh, these are the main 4 pillars of what we do. Natural components, microbiological aspect, national production facilities, which make us resilient to foreign exchange rates, and so on. This is the main data about our company. 80% of our staff are PhD holders, and just last week, Larissa Elina won her PhD thesis, and over 500 scientific publications have been published by our company, both independently and in co-authorship with other companies. I might say that our company is an undoubted leader in Russia in terms of studying the gut microflora in the livestock farms. And 3 contemporary techniques allow us to do that. That's TRFLP sequencing. The NGS sequencer is the most cutting-edge equipment that we have, and the PCR tests, both real-time and non-real-time, is yet another technique that we use. Our gut flora tests demonstrated that, in the past, in the petri dishes, we could cultivate 10 to 15% of the gut microflora in the real intestine, and the uncultured forms were not taken into account because everyone believed that it was very difficult or next to impossible to cultivate them in the petri dishes, and we did not know much about such organisms. As for the poultry industry, we've been long studying the gut microflora in poultry with the help of the cutting-edge technologies, and we identified 27 films from 173 families. Ultimately, we're talking about 686 different species of microorganisms. As far as the NGS second generation sequencer is concerned, I just wanted to mention that in addition to identifying the type of the species, this device can also help you do full genome mapping, as well as identify the gene expression based on depending on specific factors. The gut microflora was studied throughout the intestinal tract from the crop to the vent, and the main species populating the intestines and the gut, different parts of the gut, are shown here.
Соответственно, при анализе того микробного состава, как
When we
количество...
analyze the microbes in specific parts of the gut, we use the mathematical data processing, and we identify the following common features. When the gut flora from the crop, well, of course, crop is where you find the feed, and this is the first part of the body of the bird that gets populated with the gut flora. And then we compared it with the flora of the cecum, and we saw that they were quite similar. We did these experiments a number of times, and we ultimately drew a conclusion that it is sufficient to assess the cecum gut flora to evaluate the overall gut flora. In cecum, the flora stays intact for a certain period of time, which allows you to assess the entire composition of the gut flora in the intestine. We analyzed the day-old chick gut flora that had not a chance to intake any feed yet. And this diagram shows that quite a number of microorganisms, both pathogenic and non-pathogenic, were identified. Actually, pathogens were in high numbers. We're talking about Pasteurellus, Campylobacter, and so on and so forth. Their composition varied from 25 to 30%, which is a norm. Which just goes to show you that initially day-old chicks are populated with pathogens. Jointly with the Poultry Research Institute, we decided to drill down on the origins and the source of the gut flora. We did the molecular genetic analysis of the gut flora of embryos, and it turns out that despite the fact that we believe that eggs were totally sterile, actually it contained non-pathogens and pathogens in its flora, as well as transient microorganisms. We assumed that the high number of pathogens in the egg meant that the retrograde motility was in place. And this is probably the most relative assumption. When we studied the impact of various microorganisms populating the gut on each other and on other parameters, we drew, for instance, we compared the staphylococci count and its impact on the live weight. We identified both direct and reverse correlation.
Микроорганизмы имеют четкую, живут они в
All microorganisms live at a certain balance in the gut, and they much depend on the counts of each other. For instance, in the upper right-hand corner, you can see the correlations between different types of microorganisms. To sum up, we can draw a very simple conclusion. The more lactobacteria you see, the higher the productivity of a hen, and the higher the count of Pasteurellus, Campylobacteria. You have 1 minute left. Right. Having analyzed a large number of hens, we're talking about 15,000 birds. We we identified the main factors shown here. Pathogens get into the gut with the feed. The data shown in the slide, Campylobacter accounts for 81%. Well, 81% of the Campylobacterium gets into the gut with the feed. The composition of the feed has a huge impact. One of the research institutes did a study on 4 different feeds. The diagrams show the content of the microorganisms depending on the grain or meal content in the feed. And the conclusion was the higher the content of the meals, the more pathogens you get in the gut. And depending on the vaccination programs and the types of vaccines, and by the way, we compared the live and the inactivated vaccine, you get different results. Live vaccine has a more pronounced impact on the gut flora, while inactivated vaccine increases the number of pathogens in the gut flora. At least these are the results that we received. Gut microflora is heavily affected by antibiotics. So we're talking about pathogens and non-pathogens. We did the study jointly with the poultry. Instead, they added the probiotic, and this is the impact of both. In addition to mycotoxins, one of the main factors that has an impact on the gut flora is the glyphosate in the feed. There are just two labs, our lab and the one in Belgorod, can identify the level of glyphosate. In 96% of feeds, glyphosates were identified, and this is especially true for stored feed. The genetics might be good, the feed intake might be good, but the average daily gains are not as high as desired. So if you analyze the glyphosate content, you see that it's high. And if we're talking about broilers, naturally there will be a certain retardation of the growth rates. And at various poultry farms, what I see is pink eggs. One of the factors that has an impact on that is glyphosate content in the feed. Microorganisms get into the gut, then get into the blood flow, and they can also accumulate in the joint fluid. If you compare the gut flora and the joint, please wrap up your presentation. Well, I'm almost done. Since we produce probiotics, we recommend that probiotics should be used based on the outcomes. Currently, we are working on replacing antibiotics with probiotics. Pro4 and Pro4T are the drugs that we offer. Unfortunately, I'm out of time. It's a complex substance that comprises two microorganisms shown here, and all the microorganisms contained in the drug, in the probiotic, were subjected to full genome sequencing, and one of the metabolites found is here is the butyric acid metabolite. Butyric acid has an impact on villi growth. This is one of the experiments. A substance that degrades mycotoxins is also contained in the probiotic, and the Bacillus megateria synthesizes certain substances that biotransform such mycotoxins as desoxymalonol and aflatoxin A. That's the impact of Pro4 on different pathogens in the poultry gut flora. Pro4 reduces the salmonella count in the broiler chicks threefold. Another problem everyone encounters is Enterococcus cecorum, especially in layer and parent flocks. It affects the entire healthy stock, and this pathogen is often a problem. What do we recommend? We recommend using probiotics that can replace the pathogenic microflora as compared to foreign products. In conclusion, this is the last experiment that I want to touch upon. Pro4 application at the Sitna holding company. That's the Nogobayskaya poultry farm. The reason I'm showing you this table is to demonstrate the way probiotic works. The results are not immediate, but over the 2 weeks, you can see the decreasing average daily gain. It's only at week 3 that you start seeing growing ADG, and at the slaughter deadline, the live weight difference was 133 grams, which resulted in 194 Russian rubles profit per ton of feed. And this is the very last slide of my presentation. I attended a conference on the 31st of May when students shared the results of their work with the audience about probiotics. And it was interesting to hear that they would just add one bacteria to their probiotic, and this is it. 60% of microorganisms have similar genome, but 40% is the difference between the microorganisms. And our technique allows us to identify significant differences in different strains of the same bacteria. The ongoing trend in probiotic production is full genome mapping, which means that you have to know all the metabolites that can be produced by these probiotics. And I believe that this is something that we should expect in the future. That brings me to the end of my presentation. Thank you so much. Did I infringe on the coffee break? Can I ask you one question, please? Are all lactobacteria useful for poultry gut flora? Lactobacteria, are they all useful? The general opinion is lactobacteria are useful for hens, but you know, some of them might be more useful than others. And if you don't know their specific properties, then you might not be aware that in addition to beneficial properties, they might have some inhibiting action, which means that, well, overall they are beneficial, but there are pathogenic lactobacteria. I also heard that lactobacteria in a product can reduce the shelf life. At least there is data confirming that. Right. There is another question from the audience. Go ahead. I was just wondering, you mentioned that you use nationally produced equipment. What about NGS sequencers? I guess you know the answer to that question. What happens if it gets out of order? Well, you know, we'll start looking. We'll start looking for 20 million Russian rubles to repair it. Well, actually, there are nationally produced NGS sequencers, and they operate perfectly well.